The town of Valle Quemado sat at the edge of the desert like a forgotten memory, its wooden buildings sun-bleached, its streets carved by horse tracks, and its people surviving more out of habit than hope. Every morning when the dawn light spilled gently over the rooftops, a lone figure could always be seen walking slowly through the center of town, a man wrapped in a weather-worn poncho, its faded colors barely holding on after years of sun, wind, and gunfire. People called him El Poncho Viejo. No one knew his real name, and most didn't dare ask. He was a man who seemed carved from silence and shadows. His beard was gray with streaks of stubborn black. His boots were cracked from miles of dust, and his eyes, deep, calm, and watchful, never missed a thing, even if they pretended to. He spent most of his time near the cantina, sitting on the tilted wooden bench as if he had been nailed to it decades ago. He rarely drank, rarely spoke, and rarely moved unless necessary. Yet, despite his quiet presence, there were stories. Some said he once shot 6 men in the span of a single heartbeat. Others whispered that he used to work as a hired gun for the railroad barons. A few believed he was a former sheriff from a distant territory, one whose family had been taken from him, leaving behind only his skills with the gun and the poncho he still wore like a blanket of memories. No matter which story people believed, everyone agreed on one thing. El Poncho Viejo was not a man to underestimate. Still, as years passed and the old poncho grew thinner and the man beneath it slower in his walk, newcomers, the kind who believed strength came from noise instead of skill, often overlooked him. Travelers saw only an old-timer with a limp and a fading wardrobe. They didn't know that his hands, though weathered, could still move like lightning. They didn't know that the poncho hid a pair of holsters precisely where his hands naturally rested. They didn't know that the quiet man, if provoked, could turn the dusty street into a place of reckoning. But the residents of Valle Quemado remembered. The bartender, Don Mateo, had been a young man when he first saw what the old shooter was capable of. He never spoke of it openly, but every time someone got too close to provoking El Poncho Viejo, Don Mateo's expression shifted, a mixture of fear and respect, as though he was silently praying someone wouldn't do something foolish. That morning, as the town tried to wipe the sleep from its eyes, an uneasy wind blew in from the east. The kind of wind that carried trouble with it. From the rim of the hills came the sound of hooves, many of them. Dust rose like a small storm behind a group of riders making their way toward Valle Quemado. Their silhouettes were dark and sharp, their movements confident, imposing. As they got closer, the people recognized them, and fear spread faster than wildfire. It was Los Fieros Negros, a gang of ruthless bandits known across 3 counties for burning down ranches, taking towns hostage, and killing anyone who refused to kneel. Their leader, Cerro Delgado, was a man whose cruelty was matched only by his ambition. Wherever he rode, he left a trail of smoke and blood behind him. The town froze. Merchants closed their stalls, mothers dragged their children inside, and even the sheriff, an honest man but not a brave one, slipped into his office and shut the door. Everyone knew what Los Fieros Negros were capable of. Valle Quemado had nothing worth fighting for except its people, and those people were terrified. Except one? El Poncho Viejo remained seated on his bench outside the cantina, his head slightly tilted as he listened to the rhythm of approaching hooves. He recognized that sound. It wasn't the randomness of travelers or ranch hands. It was the disciplined cadence of men who knew violence as a language. The wind lifted the edge of his poncho, revealing for a moment the glint of metal-silver polished revolvers resting patiently in their holsters. But no one else seemed to notice. They were too busy scrambling for safety. The bandits rode into town like a storm breaking through silence. Their horses snorted, their boots thudded against the dirt, and their laughter echoed with cruelty. Delgado dismounted first, tall, arrogant, and dressed in black leather trimmed with silver. His eyes scanned the town with the satisfaction of a wolf entering a pen full of sheep. "Look at this place," he sneered to his men. Quiet, weak, perfect. But then something caught his eye, an old man in a tattered poncho, sitting calmly as though nothing unusual was happening. Delgado frowned. Most people ran from him. This one remained seated, unimpressed, unshaken. Who's that? He asked one of his men. Just a nobody, boss, the bandit replied. Some old fool who barely moves. Thinks he's invisible or something. Delgado's lips curved into a cruel grin. If there was one thing he loved more than stealing, it was humiliating those who dared to remain calm in his presence. To him, calmness was disrespect. Confidence was a challenge. And challenges needed to be crushed. He gave a hand signal, and two men stepped forward, moving toward El Poncho Viejo. They walked with swagger, kicking up dust, mocking him aloud so the whole town could hear. Well, look here, one taunted. The desert's oldest scarecrow. Hey, old man, you deaf? The other laughed. We're talking to you. El Poncho Viejo didn't move. His eyes stayed focused on the ground, his breathing steady, as though he were listening to something deeper than their insults. The townspeople watched from behind their shutters, fear and curiosity mixing in their faces. One bandit stepped closer and shoved his shoulder. Still no reaction. Then the second bandit grabbed the edge of the poncho and tugged it roughly, tearing the old fabric a little more. That small tear revealed part of a gun handle silver, pristine, too well kept for a man who looked so shabby. But the bandits didn't understand what they were seeing. They assumed it was another dusty relic. What they didn't notice was the slightest twitch of the old man's fingers beneath the poncho. It lasted only a second, subtle as a breath, but it was enough to make Don Mateo, watching from the cantina doorway, feel a chill climb his spine. He had seen that twitch before. It was the same small movement El Poncho Viejo made years ago, right before the last group of fools tried something similar, and the quiet street turned into a lightning storm of bullets. The bandits laughed again, completely unaware that they were standing on the edge of a sleeping volcano, and the volcano was waking up. The sun climbed higher above Valle Quemado, casting long, sharp shadows between the old buildings as the tension tightened like a rope around the town's throat. The presence of Los Fieros Negros was like poison in the air, every window shuttered, every breath held, every prayer whispered in silence. The only person untouched by the fear was the same man who had been untouched by everything else, El Poncho Viejo. Despite the harsh shoving and mocking from the two bandits who surrounded him, the old man did not lift his gaze. His stillness only fueled their arrogance. His silence misinterpreted as weakness encouraged their cruelty. They believed they had found their first victim of the day. Inside the cantina doorway, Don Mateo wiped his trembling hands on his apron as he watched the scene unfold. He felt torn. He wanted to warn the bandits, tell them to back away, to leave the old man alone, because Mateo knew better than most that this wasn't a stranger they were provoking. It was a storm wearing a poncho. But Mateo also knew Cerro Delgado's kind. Any sign of warning would only make things worse for the old man, the town, and possibly Mateo himself. Across the street, a woman clutching her young son pulled him away from the window. The boy asked in a whisper, "Mama, why doesn't he do anything?" Her voice quivered as she replied, "Because some men don't need to." But the bandits didn't share the same understanding. They had spent years bullying, robbing, humiliating, and killing without consequence to them. Every man in their path was either a tool, a toy, or a target. And the quiet old drifter in the ragged poncho looked like all three. One of the bandits, a tall man with a jagged scar across his cheek, leaned down and slapped the brim of the old man's hat just to watch it tilt. "You lost, Viejo?" he jeered. "Or are you just too old to stand up?" His partner, shorter but stockier, reached again for the poncho, grabbing a handful of fabric and yanking it upward. More of the holster glinted in the sunlight. This time, A couple of townspeople gasped from hiding, but the bandits only snickered. "You packing iron, old man?" the short bandit mocked. "What for? To scare the crows?" Cerro Delgado, who had remained mounted so far, watched the scene with growing amusement. His teeth flashed in a grin that never reached his eyes. He thrived on domination over land, over towns, over men. Seeing someone ignore him, intentionally or not, stirred something dangerous inside him. He swung down from his horse, boots crunching the dusty earth, and walked toward the gathering. His presence alone made the two bandits stand straighter. The rest of his men, a dozen in total, spread out across the plaza with sinister grins and hands resting on their weapons. Delgado looked down at El Poncho Viejo, studying him. "Strange," he said casually. "Most men greet us with fear. But you," he flicked a finger under the old man's chin, raising it slightly, "you don't even lift your head." The old man's eyes finally moved, just barely, just enough for Delgado to see the calmness behind them. Not fear, not defiance. Just calm. That irritated Delgado more than if the old man had spat in his face. He snapped his fingers. "Bring him to the center. We'll give our new friends in Valle Quemado a show." The two bandits yanked the old man up by his shoulders. El Poncho Viejo rose slowly, but not because he was weak. It was a deliberate kind of slowness, the kind a rattlesnake uses before striking. But the bandits mistook it for stiffness, for age, for vulnerability. They dragged him into the heart of the plaza, kicking up dust around his boots. The poncho swayed gently with each pull, the torn edge fluttering like a warning flag that no one recognized. Delgado followed behind them, enjoying the tension he created. He knew the townspeople were watching from behind closed doors, trembling. He wanted them to see what happened to those who didn't obey. Fear was the currency he traded in, and today he planned to collect a fortune. By the time they reached the plaza center, the sun was directly above them, heating the earth until the air shimmered. The old man stood still as the bandits pushed him forward. "On your knees," one spat. The old man did not kneel. Delgado stepped closer, hands resting on his gun belt. "I'm giving you a choice, Viejo," he said softly. "On your knees, or in the ground." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Inside the cantina, Don Mateo whispered under his breath, "Don't do it. Don't make him." But the bandits were too drunk on their own power to hear anything except their leader as rising temper. The wind changed at that moment. It swept through the plaza with a sudden sharpness, lifting the edges of the poncho more than before. This time, it revealed not only the holsters, but the full polished handles of the revolvers beneath, sleek, balanced, deadly. They were guns that didn't belong to a nobody. They belonged to a legend. Some of the bandits hesitated, their instincts whispering warnings their minds didn't understand. But Delgado saw only opportunity. He laughed loudly. "Look at this." The old man thinks he's a gunfighter. His men roared with laughter, but Don Mateo felt a chill crawl up his spine. The last time he saw the revolvers exposed like that, men died before they could even scream. Delgado reached for his gun, not fully drawing, just tapping the handle in a taunting gesture. "Tell you what," he said, voice dripping with mockery. "I'll give you one chance to." But the old man still didn't look at him. His head remained slightly bowed. His fingers hung loosely at his sides. To the untrained eye, he seemed defeated. To anyone who knew guns, he looked like a fuse an inch away from lighting. One bandit stepped forward again, gripping the poncho tighter to rip it off completely. "Let me take this trash off him, boss," he said. "Let's show the town what happens to stubborn old." He didn't finish his sentence, because at that moment, something changed. Barely noticeable, unless one was watching carefully, El Poncho Viejo's breathing slowed. His shoulders straightened. His hands, those old, weathered, scarred hands, shifted just slightly, aligning perfectly with the grips of his holstered revolvers beneath the poncho. The street suddenly felt too quiet. The wind held its breath. Even the horses seemed to sense the shift. From behind a window, the little boy whispered to his mother, "Mama, what's he doing?" She answered in a trembling voice, "Something he hasn't done in a long time." The bandits sensed motion but couldn't identify its source. They glanced at each other nervously. Delgado noticed as well. His grin faded, replaced by irritation. He stepped closer, boots crunching between them. "You think this is funny, viejo?" he growled. But the old man still said nothing. The silence was no longer weakness. It was a warning, a final one. And the bandits, blinded by pride, walked straight into it. The plaza of Valle Cuamado lay suspended in a fragile silence, a silence so deep that even the wind seemed afraid to move. The townsfolk hiding behind shutters or peeking through cracks could feel the shift in the air, a pressure like thunder building in the sky. Everyone sensed it. They were too loud, too sure of themselves, too drenched in arrogance to recognize the signs. They laughed, they mocked, they circled their prey like wolves, unaware that the deer they cornered was in truth a tiger waiting for the perfect moment. El Poncho Viejo stood in the center of that tightening ring of danger. His poncho fluttered quietly, lifted by a whisper of wind that came and went like a ghost's breath. His eyes were half-lidded, his posture relaxed, almost too relaxed for a man surrounded by killers. But beneath that calm exterior lay a simmering force that had been dormant for years. Inside the cantina doorway, Don Mateo felt sweat trickle down his temple. He could almost taste the danger in the air. He had witnessed only once in his life what El Poncho Viejo could do with a pair of guns, and he remembered it vividly. If today turned into a repeat of that memory, the plaza would soon be a graveyard. Across the street, a horse pawed nervously at the dirt. Animals could sense danger before humans could, and this horse knew a predator was about to awaken. Cerro Delgado's face twisted into annoyance as he watched the old man's stillness. Delgado was used to reactions. Begging, shaking, crying silence in the face of danger unnerved him because silence meant control. And Delgado couldn't stand the idea of someone else having control. "Enough of this," he snarled. "Make him kneel." The two bandits closest to El Poncho Viejo moved to grab him again. They never touched him, because at that exact moment, something in the old man snapped into alignment. His breathing sharpened. His fingers twitched with purpose. And time, at least for him, slowed down. For the first time, El Poncho Viejo lifted his gaze fully. His eyes were no longer unfocused or calm, they were razor-sharp, glowing with the fire of a man whose past had carved skill into his bones. These were the eyes of a gunslinger who had lived and survived in a world of death. The bandit with the scar reached for him, and the world changed. To everyone watching, it happened faster than a blink. Even Don Mateo, who had been expecting something, didn't see the full movement. He only saw the end result. A flash of silver. A burst of sound so loud it shattered the silence. A body collapsing into the dirt. The scarred bandit lay on the ground, a hole in his chest, his gun still in its holster. He hadn't even started to draw. The old man's revolver smoked beneath the poncho. Gasps rippled across the plaza as the townspeople flinched back into their hiding places. The short bandit standing next to the fallen man staggered in shock, eyes wide with confusion, unable to believe what had just happened. He reached for his weapon in panic, but the old man was no longer standing still. The poncho billowed out as El Poncho Viejo moved fast, fluid, deadly. A second silver flash cut through the air, followed by another thunderous crack. The short bandit dropped his weapon and fell to his knees, clutching his bleeding shoulder. The bullet had torn through him with surgical precision enough to stop him, but not enough to kill. That was intentional. Delgado's men stared in disbelief. It had all happened in less than 2 seconds. 2 seconds. 2 bandits down. And the old man hadn't even stepped away from his position. For the first time since arriving, the laughter died from the gang. Their confidence wavered, their expression shifting from amusement to horror. "Shoot him!" someone yelled. But hesitation cost them everything. El Poncho Viejo moved like water smooth, relentless, unstoppable. Each step he took seemed guided by instinct older than the town itself. His poncho flowed with him, swirling around his movements like a cloak woven from the desert wind. He lifted his second revolver, the metal gleaming like the sun's reflection. 3 shots fired in perfect rhythm. Bang, bang. Each bullet found its mark. One bandit dropped to the ground with a hit to the leg. Another spun as a bullet grazed his arm, knocking his aim off course. A third lost his hat as a bullet whistled past his ear, warning him that the next one would not miss. Chaos erupted. Dust exploded from the ground as the bandits scrambled for cover, fear contorting their faces. Some ran behind horses, others ducked behind troughs or barrels. The bravest tried firing back, but their hands shook, their aim was sloppy, and every shot went wide. El Poncho Viejo's return fire, on the other hand, was art. He shot with one hand, then with the other, switching seamlessly as though each gun was an extension of his soul. Every trigger pull was precise. Every movement was intentional. He didn't waste bullets. He didn't hesitate. He didn't miss. The plaza echoed with gunfire, the sound crashing against the buildings like waves against cliffs. Smoke curled through the air. Horses reared. Windows shattered. Dust clouds danced in the chaos. But through it all, the old shooter remained calm in motion, calm in danger, calm in death. He moved forward step by step, his boots steady, his eyes laser-focused. He had done this before, too many times, and he never forgot how. 2 more bandits fell to the ground, clutching their wounds. Another dropped his gun and crawled desperately toward the horse trough, trying to flee. In less than a minute, the number of bandits still standing had been cut in half. Somewhere behind the shutters, a woman whispered, He's not a man. He's a storm." Another voice murmured, "No, he's justice." Delgado's jaw clenched as he watched his men fall like dominoes. Rage and disbelief twisted his features. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. He had 10 men against one old drifter. One tired-looking, slow-moving, unremarkable man. Except he wasn't any of those things. He was El Tirador Fantasma, the ghost shooter, the legend that Delgado had heard whispers about in drunken tavern tales. A man who could shoot faster than sound. A man who never missed. A man Delgado should never have provoked. But pride has a way of blinding fools. "Enough!" Delgado roared, drawing his own weapon at last. El Poncho Viejo turned his head slightly, acknowledging his final opponent. Their eyes locked across the dust-filled plaza. One filled with arrogance and fury. The other with quiet, deadly certainty. The real duel had begun. And everyone, every bandit, every villager, every trembling child knew one thing. Only one of them was walking away. The plaza of Valle Comado, once quiet and forgotten, now roared with the echo of gunfire. Smoke lingered in the air like a stubborn ghost, drifting over the wounded bandits scattered across the dusty ground. The wind tugged at torn clothes, overturned barrels, and shattered glass. The villagers, still hidden behind doors and shutters, held their breath, not because the danger was gone, but because the most dangerous moment of all had arrived. All that remained was the final showdown. At the center of the plaza, El Poncho Viejo stood with both revolvers hanging loosely at his sides. His chest rose and fell steadily, not with the breathless strain of a man exhausted, but with the composure of someone who had walked this path many times before. His poncho swayed gently around him, still hiding most of his silhouette like a cloak wrapped around death itself. Across from him, Cerro Delgado, leader of Los Fieros Negros, held his gun with a rigid, white-knuckled grip. Sweat streaked his brow despite the dry heat. His eyes, once full of arrogance, now held a mixture of fear and fury that his men had fallen like helpless children, and fear because he now understood who he was facing. He had stumbled into the jaws of a legend. Delgado spat into the dust. "You're fast, viejo. I'll give you that." The old shooter said nothing. Words were the domain of the proud. Silence was the language of the deadly. Delgado paced in a slow circle, trying to read his enemy. "They say there's a ghost out here in the desert," he said, voice loud enough for his remaining men to hear. "A gunslinger who kills quicker than a shadow." "Didn't believe it," he sneered, trying to regain some semblance of dominance. "But look at you. Old, dragging your feet, hiding under a ragged poncho. That can't be the man from the stories." Still no response. The lack of reaction scraped at Delgado's nerves like sandpaper. He aimed his gun casually at the old man's chest. "You think you scare me? I've killed legends before. I make legends disappear." Behind the cantina bar, Don Mateo whispered under his breath, "Not this one? Not today." The wind shifted again, lifting the dust into delicate spirals. The sun glared down from directly overhead, as if nature itself had crafted a spotlight for the duel about to unfold. Every crack in the wood, every creak of old signs, every thump of a nervous heartbeat echoed across the plaza. Delgado stopped pacing. He planted his boots firmly into the dirt. "This town is mine," he said. "And you," he pointed the barrel at El Poncho Viejo, "are going to die slow." The old man finally moved. He shifted his feet a fraction apart, grounding himself. His hands settled near the grips of his revolvers, not touching them, but hovering close, relaxed, precise, ready. His head lowered slightly, eyes narrowing just enough to lock fully onto Delgado. Then he spoke, just one sentence. A sentence the whole town remembered for generations. "You've already lost." Delgado's jaw clenched, fury boiling over. "D.R.A.?" The world snapped into motion. Delgado's hand shot for his gun in a blur fueled by desperation and hatred. His fingers curled around the grip, pulling the weapon free of the holster. The barrel lifted, aiming to fire. But time had already left him behind. El Poncho Viejo didn't move fast because he needed to. He moved fast because that's who he was. His entire body flowed into motion with the grace of a man who had danced with death too many times to count. The poncho lifted with the wind and the speed of his arms, swirling like the wings of a great bird. Both revolvers rose simultaneously in a move so smooth it looked supernatural. 2 shots cracked through the air. Not at the same time, but close enough to sound like a single heartbeat's double echo. The first bullet hit Delgado's gun, shattering it into a burst of sparks and metal fragments. The shattered weapon flew from his hand, spinning uselessly into the dirt. The second bullet hit Delgado's right shoulder with brutal force, spinning him around and dropping him to his knees. He screamed in pain as blood seeped through his dark leather vest. The plaza went silent again. El Poncho Viejo stood motionless, gun steady, eyes locked on his fallen opponent. Delgado gasped for breath, clutching his shoulder. Rage twisted his face, but behind it, panic swirled like a storm. He looked at the old man and finally understood the magnitude of the mistake he had made. "You," he spat through gritted teeth. "You're him, El Fantasma." The old man didn't bother confirming it. He didn't need to. His skill spoke louder than any name ever could. The remaining bandits, seeing their leader defeated, stared in disbelief. A few tried to stand, but the weight of terror glued them in place. A couple dropped their weapons, shaking uncontrollably. El Poncho Viejo walked slowly toward Delgado, boots crunching in the dust. Each step carried a gravity that made even the bravest tremble. When he stopped in front of the injured bandit leader, Delgado looked up defiantly. His voice shook, but he forced out a snarl. "Finish it, Viejo. Kill me." El Poncho Viejo lowered his weapons. The townspeople watching gasped. Even the last surviving bandits blinked in confusion. "No," the old man said quietly. "Death would be mercy." He gestured toward the broken remnants of Delgado's gang sprawled around the plaza. "You will ride out of here, alone. Your men gone, your name shattered, your pride buried." Delgado trembled not from pain, but from humiliation. He tried to stand, but collapsed again. His face twisted with hatred. "You can't let me live." "I can," the old man replied. "And I am." He holstered one revolver, then slowly holstered the other, letting the poncho fall back into place like a closing curtain. "You will remember today," he said, "and every man you meet will know what happened here. Your power ends now." Delgado crawled backward, fury and despair warring inside him. No one helped him, not his men, not the townspeople. He was broken physically, mentally, and reputation. El Poncho Viejo stepped aside. "Go." Delgado staggered to his feet, clutching his ruined shoulder. He climbed onto the nearest horse with difficulty. With one last hateful stare, he spurred the horse away, disappearing toward the horizon. None of the surviving bandits followed. They fled on foot, dropping their weapons and leaving behind their fallen comrades. Silence reclaimed Valle Quemado. Then slowly doors creaked open. Villagers emerged, stunned, awestruck, grateful. Don Mateo wiped tears from his eyes. The little boy from before stared wide-eyed, whispering, "Mama." He saved us. El Poncho Viejo didn't stay to accept praise. He simply walked back to his usual bench outside the cantina and sat down as if nothing remarkable had happened. The wind lifted the corner of his poncho once more. Underneath it, the revolvers rested quietly silent, patient, deadly. The town would speak of this day for generations. But for the man under the poncho, it was merely another chapter in a long life forged by shadows and gunpowder.